mapping and tracking global systems come into play in my work through looking at various ways technology can change the way that we relate to landscape. The definition of landscape can be varied. For me, I think it's most useful to think of it as a medium with and through which we act. It's a broad definition that includes the natural environment that we fight to sustain, the fields that we grow our food in, the earth that we move to create our cities, and increasingly, the networks that we use for communication and distribution. In Australia, it also holds a very valuable position in Indigenous Dreamtime stories that tie together people with country in a very deep and meaningful way, that we collectively have a long way to go towards understanding and respecting. The significance of landscape is very tied to ourselves as individuals and groups, and it's a primary way that we identify ourselves, our countries, and our planet. Landscape is immensely important for making sense of who we are. I became interested in landscape through recognising a problem I had with a default way that people view nature. This idea that nature is at its purest when it's wild and untouched by humans. I find it problematic that this perspective relegates humans to a doomed existence where any action has a negative impact on our surrounding environment. I understand this perspective as a response to substantial environmental issues that we've caused, but I see it unhelpful as it leads to us to avoid the complex reality of the situation. So through my ongoing research, I encounter many examples of how our relationship with landscape is changing with digital technologies. Ubiquitous digital map use, the drone's eye view, location-based services, satellite imaging, location photography on Mars, AI and machine imaging, remote sensing, on and on. All of these things are quite at odds with a traditional notion of landscape, but on close inspection, they are very connected to the way that we interact with our surrounding environment and our lives today. So in 2011, I created my first series of works that dealt with landscape, and for the series titled Hypergeography, I was specifically interested in blending together imagery associated with these notions of natural, built and networked environments that seem very separate. And I was trying to kind of incorporate them all into all these separate parts into an integrated vision. So I'll show you the video work from the series. It's quite short. So to create the piece, I used found video, images, 3D models and sound and combined them all with software and compositing techniques often used in the movie industry to achieve special effects. I used BBC nature documentary footage as the backdrop, the base layer, and overlaid architectural elements, fragments of technology to contaminate the pristine natural setting. I also chose to appropriate the slick visual form of the nature documentary with the sweeping camera moves and the ambient sounds, which allowed me to augment this stereotype directly through my recomposition and layering on top. So the BBC nature documentary footage makes for a perfect example of this stereotypical nature that I'm talking about. And one example of a crack in this myth is when David Attenborough and his team were exposed of misleading viewers when a polar bear was filmed giving birth to baby cubs surrounded by fake snow in a zoo in the Netherlands. In the documentary, the footage is interspersed with real shots of the Arctic, while Sir David's carefully worded narration led viewers to believe the scene was genuine. These are some stills from that. A veteran cameraman, Doug Allen from the BBC, confirmed that wildlife shots are faked all the time. Species smaller than a baby rabbit are put in custom-built sets and filmed under controlled conditions rather than in the wild. David Attenborough defended the footage, saying, "Come on, we're making movies." But the negative response from the public seemed to suggest they have expectations of documentaries being more authentic than just movies. I found it difficult to find a decent clip of the actual scene, and I imagine this is because BBC used their right to have copyrighted material removed from YouTube, and maybe specifically of this clip. Luckily, they haven't approached me for using their material in my work. And these are just some images that maybe show what's going on behind the scenes on a nature documentary shoot, where it's obviously a lot of technology, there's people in the landscape, and it's not as, not what we see on the documentary. So the next work is titled Div Contour that I want to talk about. This is an online work. So it can be explored by scrolling, and it also moves on its own. So it's an interactive collage of found images and JavaScript code, and it's been exhibited on a touchscreen, but it's also viewable online to anyone. So the piece scrolls vertically, cycling through 8 coloured theme sections that overlap and shift position. Images include a loose selection of textures, patterns, tech gadgets, camping gear, and climbing equipment. And I was interested in contrasting the smooth, glossy consumer products of rock climbing and camping with various textures. For me, the piece was about drawing a connection between rock climbing and the endless vertical scrolling I was doing at the time to collect these images and to explore websites like Tumblr. Even though our bodies don't go anywhere when we're online, we still feel like that we're going on a journey of some sort, and it even comes across in the way that we talk about it. We say that we go to a website rather than saying that the website comes to us. So, while talking to a cartographer recently for my research, he spoke about how maps have changed over the years and over the course of his career. He said that it was once a craft that you could take pride in, and people would treasure the objects by framing them and putting them on the wall. Just get rid of this. So maps have changed from idle pieces of paper that you might put on your wall to fluid digital systems that are integrated into communications, transport, products and services. This evolution of maps has changed how we relate to the world around us. When we open up a map now, we don't have to search for our location. We no longer have to trace the directions with our eyes or a highlighter pen. On a digital map, you're at the center of the map, and the landscape radiates out in all directions from your location. It's a combination of yourself, your location, and the software all coming together. So Google is also massive in this area, and they customize the features of their app for your convenience and for other purposes. Highlights of the details are significant based on a mixture of practical, cultural, commercial and political reasons that might not be at first obvious. Google will make an effort to maintain an identity of being unbiased, but they are involved in an endless number of controversies over how they misuse the data. One significant example is known as Y-Spy, where Street View cars that go around and take the photographs for Street View were illegally swallowing up traffic from unencrypted wireless networks, emails, web addresses, and other content which included online dating profiles and the sexual preferences of household members. When the German government caught them, the leader of the Street View division, John Hank, blamed an individual rogue programmer. But in court, it was revealed that The knowledge of the collection of data was widespread, and the data had been shared up the chain of command without any questioning. Excuse me. So the next piece I wanted to talk about is indirect flights, another online work of mine. I'm going to have to just move across to make it do something. But it's a work that I made in 2015, and it uses a method of interaction that viewers will be familiar from digital maps. You can pan around endlessly in any direction to find a panorama landscape of laid images in all directions, raw materials, satellite images, organic textures, brushstrokes, architectural fragments. They're all blended together into this sprawling landscape. I was interested in having both the macro and the micro views coexisting in this space, and I wanted to say something about how our bodies are constantly in a direct, intimate relationship with the surrounding world, but we're also experiencing through technology other perspectives through satellite imagery and the convenience of traveling by aeroplane, looking down on the world. So this piece also references histories of landscape painting, and there are brushstrokes throughout the piece that have been lifted from classic landscape paintings by Van Gogh and Arthur Seton. So that piece can be viewed on iPhone or online, and it's also been shown on touchscreens in galleries and museums. So another work from that series is this video piece, Regular Division, that also incorporates those brushstrokes. And the work is a spiral of scenes from a number of indoor gardens that I shot personally for this work in Europe and Asia. And I was interested in the grid that overlay these spaces to separate these spaces from the surrounding urban environment. And the grid served as a great way to transition from one place to another using the editing. I'll just leave that playing for now. So as our mapping technology trickles down to consumers, there are always more advanced technologies used by research in corporations and military. One technology that has come quite prominent is LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging. So this is some video that's been put together from LiDAR data and photographs kind of blended together. And I'll just jump forward a bit to where the camera goes amongst it. So it's a very kind of unique view of landscape, something that we're not kind of familiar with maybe. But the remote sensing method developed in the 1960s and was mostly used when attached to the bottom of an aircraft to map the surface of the Earth in 3D. It's also used from the ground, both stationary and attached to cars. And it gained a lot of attention, has gained a lot of attention lately for being included in driverless cars. So LiDAR has also been used recently to make significant discoveries in the jungle in Cambodia. So they used LiDAR, an Australian archaeologist used LiDAR with his team to discover a vast medieval city hidden underneath the dense foliage of the jungle. The cities, there's multiple, are believed to be around 1,000 years old, and they would have been the world's largest cities at the time. So here at bottom right is a LiDAR image, and then another visualization The denseness of the jungle meant that people couldn't hack into there with machetes as they usually do to start digging. And instead of having to dig up the whole space to see what's under it, they could get this very clear picture from the LiDAR scans. It revealed a sprawling network of temples, palaces, ordinary dwellings, and waterwork infrastructure hidden beneath the jungle. So that was a recent discovery just this year. LiDAR data has also become of interest to players of the game Minecraft, who use these data sets to automatically build up virtual worlds from the data. So this is one example of how in Northampton in the US, the data was taken to automatically construct this scene in this very crude Minecraft style. So another popular game, Grand Theft Auto, is rumoured to use the entire landmass of the United States in its 2020 release of the game. It hasn't been confirmed, but if this goes ahead, it's likely that technology like LiDAR will be used to automatically generate much of the game's terrain. And here are some examples from previous versions of the game where they've taken scenes in LA and recreated them. And I don't think they've used LiDAR technology on this, which is a smaller scale, but to have a recreated 3D world of the entire US country would be quite something. So moving on to some of my work again. For this most recent series of mixed media works, I used LiDAR data along with a selection of other source material, and they were kind of combined in a way as portraits of landscape in a data storage form. Each panel is about 1.2 meters tall, so maybe bigger than they are there on the projection, but they're printed on aluminium and then put onto these custom aluminium frames to have the kind of shape and appearance of a stretched canvas. And the imagery and data sources that make up the composition are all taken from online sources, so I didn't use a camera or a sensor to collect any of the data. My role was to use various methods of searching for this material and collecting it from databases here and there, then cropping, layering and composing the piece, and finally transferring the composite image into a new physical form. The way I've constrained the images in the blocks was for me about how data can be spatially visualized on a hard drive. While the pixels don't appear while the pixels do appear in order on a screen, they don't necessarily exist in order or in that form on a hard drive. I wanted to present a push and pull between technology's tendency to contain into a grid and nature's tendency to break free of a grid structure. So these works are part of the same exhibition. I used a similar method of blocking out the textural images, but here using the pelican case as the canvas. I was interested in how these cases were used as a barrier to keep the damaging forces of nature away from the technology, and I wanted to bring the smooth shapes and bright colours of cases together with the coarse earthly textures. And another work from the show, sculptural piece. This is a framework piece from the exhibition that was created with solar panel frames as the base, and the long pieces of aluminium were used to arrange various blocks of earthly textures again. This grid frame in these works speak of the transmission of data from its original place to its storage location. So, as I'm sure most of you are aware, Pokemon Go is a location-based augmented reality game for smartphones. And while most mobile games cause the user to disengage with their surroundings, Pokemon Go requires that you move around as it uses real-world GPS location navigation to move your digital avatar around. The aim of the game is to walk around to find the creatures and then catch them and build your collection. And advanced users can train their Pokemons up and fight them against other players. The creatures are not geolocated randomly throughout the world. The game developers have created a sophisticated system for where they are positioned, with certain types being found in arid climates, while others being specific to grasslands or coastal areas. There are many hidden rules like this for where they can be found. This back-end technology would not be known outside the developer's office if it wasn't for a group of enthusiastic game players who reverse engineered the game using custom software. And I'm just going to show a clip of them discussing it here.
Hey travelers, I'm Dross.
And I'm Moose.
Today the Sylph team gets to unveil some information that we've been excited to share for a very long time.
So the Sylph research team was comprised of over 300 Pokemon Go field testers, and each of them was outfitted with the Sylph web app.
The web app enabled field testers to record a bunch of real-time sensor data as a Pokemon spawn occurred. They recorded everything from temperature, wind speed, daylight remaining, to the terrain, and even specifics about the Pokemon itself, like its CP and moveset.
We even recorded crazy stuff like the moon phase, just to see if it had any correlation. And then, the Sylph data science team took over 15,000 sighting reports and ran an analysis against them to see what statistical significances there were.
So they're pretty passionate about it. Yeah. So there's a lot to it, but the game has broken many records for its popularity, with the number of active users topping Twitter and getting more engagement than Facebook in the first months of the release. As with many big social media websites and apps, people are worried about how data that is collected will be used. And this was the topic for an article in The Intercept recently, which mentioned that unlike Twitter, Facebook, or Netflix, Pokemon Go requires uninterrupted use of your location and camera. A trove of sensitive user data, as one privacy watchdog put it in a letter to the federal regulators. The article goes on to reveal that John Hank is the CEO of the company that developed Pokemon Go, the same man at the center of the Y-Spy scandal that I mentioned earlier. So before knowing any of this, I installed the game and played it to see what all the fuss was about, and I was impressed by how Moorish the gameplay was, and the geolocation aspect was very unique, a unique experience, but I couldn't really bring myself to play for longer than a couple of days. What I did find fascinating was how this relationship between mythical creatures was found elsewhere in culture, and specifically in Aboriginal mythology here in Australia. The bunyip, for example, is a large mythical creature said to lurk in swamps, billabongs, creeks, riverbeds, and waterholes. I had my own experience with these stories in 2011 when assisting a friend and Melbourne-based Indigenous artist Steve Payton on his urban Doolagar project for the city of Melbourne. The project was a contemporary twist on the traditional story of a Yeti-type creature that lives in the mountains near the coast in Victoria. In the story, the Doolagar comes to Melbourne, where there is a clash of cultures between Aboriginal Victoria and modern culture. Sculptures of the creature were hidden away in laneways throughout Melbourne for people to discover, much the same way as they roam around Melbourne trying to discover Pokemon creatures. And in another project titled Modified by Steve, users were invited to download a custom mobile app, which also used augmented reality. And this was for Next Wave, not this recent one, but the one before. So obviously way before Pokemon Go. and the users had to spear a cow here in the Carlton Gardens to reenact the history of Aboriginal people spearing cattle they found on their land. And they used a similar kind of motion to Pokemon Go. So Steve's idea was to retell events that had been biased against Aboriginal people and not represented in landscape paintings of the settlers. He described it in an interview by saying, it was a misunderstanding of ownership. The settlers saw Aboriginal people as savage animal killing their stock, but Aboriginal people thought if something was on their land, they had the right to it. So Pokemon Go shares some interesting similarities with these Aboriginal stories, especially the geo-specific mythical creatures. And it's exciting to see how Steve is bringing the technology, landscape and Aboriginal stories together. And it would be fantastic to see more projects like these bringing attention to these important, underappreciated stories. So I'm just going to end on this work of mine that shows someone in the act of stealing a John Glover painting from the NGV. And the painting is of Mount Wellington in Tasmania, which is where I grew up. And that's it. Thanks.